What links Greta Thunberg, Tony Hawk, and Harper Lee? To me, it's the fact that their identity to us is so deeply embedded in how we perceive what they do. Harper Lee is an author, Tony Hawk is a professional skateboarder, and Greta Thunberg is an activist. The fact that Harper Lee wasn't as prolific as somebody like Stephen King doesn't change that. The fact that Tony Hawk has been retired for 20 years doesn't change that. And an act of activism doesn't end when that act ends. Now, that coupling of an idea of a perception and identity is really interesting and really useful. It's useful when we talk about celebrities, but it can be even more useful when we talk about ourselves. Unfortunately, it's difficult to do because identity is difficult to quantify. In research, we sometimes use the idea of occupational identity, at the core of which is self-definition and affect, how we define the role and the work that we have, and how we feel about that role and that work. Now that's very powerful, that coupling of occupation and identity. And so I want to ask you a question. What do you imagine an astronomer looks like? Is it a man in a lab coat peering through a telescope? Maybe it's something more sci-fi and Hollywood, something like Science Officer T-Pole from Star Trek Enterprise. Or maybe it's something older and closer to home, related to the Australian Indigenous culture of using astronomy as both a navigational instrument, a calendar, but also a record of their history. Astronomy is the oldest science. It is at the heart of both our history and modern culture. And yet what modern astronomy looks like, what a modern astronomer does, can often be far different to what we imagine, our perspective. And so I want to take you on a journey from starting as a student, then becoming a PhD candidate, and finally being a doctor in astronomy. Now this tells us a lot about astronomy, but it tells us even more about ourselves. So we begin as a student, developing the motivations for what we want to do and be in life. For me, personally, I have always loved space. I loved it so much that I had my mum build me a flying saucer lamp in my childhood bedroom. For many of the people who I have interviewed, who have gone through that journey of becoming a professional astronomer, their motivations start at a similar place and from a similar time. It's falling in love with space, the beauty and the vastness of the night sky. Because in that moment, the universe feels infinite, and so does our childlike curiosity for it. But then reality strikes. We start our undergraduate and realize that astronomy also means coding, statistics, and banging your head against mathematics and physics. And that can be a really difficult transition to go through. You start out thinking you're coming in for telescopes and the night sky, when in reality, you're submitting assignments 1 minute before midnight on differential equations. But here's the thing. Even in that moment, during that shift, identity is still forming. We're still trying to figure out if this is what we want to be and if this is what we want to do in life. And then you'll have to make a choice. Do I want to continue down this path, continue on this road? And if you do, you'll start a PhD. And there will be this forceful collision between your perspective, your expectations, and the reality of being a science astronomer. One of my interviewees put this in a great way. She talked about how all through her undergraduate, she had been told to expect this empirical, data-driven research space. And what she got instead was people's personalities, their subjectivity, and their biases. And that changed her expectation. It filled her with a lot of doubt. At some points, that was even existential. because science is presented as this empirical, intelligent thing, and yet what she was doing was really no different to a lot of other people's jobs. And so why do we present as so smart? That's the paradox of identity during the PhD, because you're no longer just another student, but you're not a doctor yet either. You're suspended somewhere in the middle, developing skills, but also developing confidence and reshaping how you see yourself. And then one day, like that, you'll finish your thesis, you'll put it in, you'll perform your viva, and with any luck, you'll pass, and you'll get to put doctor at the end of your name. And now that can feel like the end of a marathon in some ways. But in others, in terms of identity and doing the work of an astronomer, well, you've been doing that since day one. Some of those graduates will stay in research, but many more choose to change careers. They go into industry, into government, and into teaching. When I ask them about how they felt about going through that career transition, they don't see it as a failure. They don't see it as giving up. They see it as evolution, because they've gotten to be an astronomer. They've gotten to develop those incredible skills through astronomy. And now they get to take those skills and apply them to a wide range of really interesting challenges. Many of them, almost all of them in fact, still consider themselves astronomers. Because being an astronomer, well, it's not about working in research astronomy. Being an astronomer is a perspective. It's about the problem-solving ability, the ability to work through inconsistencies, and the ability to live through those challenges. It's an identity. I've told you this story of identity through astronomy because I love astronomy and the people I talk to love astronomy. But the reality is, for most of the people in this room, astronomy doesn't matter. The thing that matters is how our reality, our experiences, shape our identity. Now that is an idea that is not just for scientists, and it's not just for when you're learning something in an academic setting. It's for anyone starting a journey, any journey, expecting it to be one way, having a perception that it's going to be one way, and then finding out that reality has other plans. So, no matter what stage of your life you are currently in, remember, interests change, careers change, but most importantly, people change. The thing that endures is the identity that we craft through those changes.